Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here with me on the dark side. I'm your host, Sherry. Today, we've got a case out of Mansfield, Ohio. While Christmas shopping in 1973, a man became one of America's most wanted, and he still is today, 51 years later. As a warning, this case does involve violence against a child and the death of a child. My sources are in the description area. This is episode 137. The case of Lester Eubanks. Let's go back to 1973 for this one. The Vietnam War ended. The Endangered Species Act passed. The Watergate scandal was one of the biggest news stories. The World Trade Center opened in New York. Skylab, the first United States space station, was launched into orbit. The top-grossing movie was The Exorcist. And in weird news from 1973, sightings of Nessie the Loch Ness Monster were ramping up. A scientific expedition used sonar to try to locate the Loch Ness Monster. There were a lot of debates about her existence. I wish I could say I believe in Nessie, but there's not much evidence she really exists these days. This case first began in 1965 in the city of Mansfield, Ohio. Mansfield is the largest city in the mid-Ohio area. It's famously known as the filming location for the 1994 film The Shawshank Redemption. But 30 years before that lived the Deener family. One of the sisters' names is Mary Ellen. She is a 14-year-old who was in 9th grade. Mary Ellen is a great student who was part of her school's newspaper team and had all A's and B's. She loved roller skating. She is known to be a very quiet kid. Her mom told Central Ohio's News Journal that all she did was eat, sleep, and read books. You know when you're a kid and everyone asks you what you want to be when you grow up? I always told everyone I wanted to work on the radio whenever someone asked. Well, according to her mother, Mary Ellen has dreams of being a nun one day. That's what she told her parents she wanted to be. She brought home books about religion and life in the Catholic Church. Having multiple daughters in the house, everyone has to pitch in with chores. So on the evening of November 14th, 1965, Mary Ellen and her sister Brenda are washing their clothes. When they went to use the dryer, it's not working. So now they have all this wet laundry and they don't know what to do with it. The great part is that they live in a well-populated area where there are laundromats everywhere. The high was 38 degrees that day, and now it's evening, so it's really cold outside. So Mom doesn't want them to walk to the laundromat carrying this basket of wet laundry in the cold. So she says she will get the two girls a cab and give them change to go dry the clothes. They're 12 and 14, so nowadays they probably wouldn't be able to go by themselves, especially at night. But it's 1965 and parents were a little more trusting back then. She feels good about the whole thing because the cab will take them right there, but also their grandmother lives right next door to the laundromat. 14-year-old Mary Ellen and her sister, 12-year-old Brenda, arrive and start drying the clothes. Once done, the clothes still aren't dry. They need more change. They have 4 quarters, but the machine takes nickels and dimes. So Mary Ellen tells Brenda she's going to walk to the gas station nearby and get change. She comes back and said she wasn't able to get any, so she's going to walk to the next laundromat to get change. You stay here with the clothes and I'll be right back. Brenda sits and waits for her sister to return. She's getting bored as the time is passing. Brenda realizes a lot of time has passed. It's late at night. Mary Ellen should have returned by now. Finally, she decides to go next door and tell their grandmother that Mary Ellen went for change and hasn't returned. Her grandmother calls their mother Cassie and tells her that Mary Ellen hasn't returned. I've got Brenda here and she said Mary Ellen should have been back by now. Cassie tells Grandmom to go look for her. I'm on my way, but go get started. Her grandmom walks down the street, but stops when she sees police lights and a large crowd gathered near a vacant house. Her heart sinks knowing this could have something to do with her granddaughter. She slowly approaches the police and tells them her 14-year-old granddaughter is missing and describes her. The police say, "We need you to come over here and take a look at the victim we have. We have a young black female. Let us know if this is your granddaughter. Can you imagine?" My heart breaks for this woman at this moment. They pull the sheet down and she says, "Yes, that's Mary Ellen." Her arm was outstretched and there were dimes and nickels scattered next to her hand, so we know she made it to the other laundromat to get change. She was on her way back and something terrible happened. Mary Ellen had 2 gunshot wounds, one in her right chest area and one in her abdomen. She had been dead for less than an hour. Now police have to find her killer. Police determined that she had been shot with a .32 caliber pistol. They waste no time getting to work finding out who did this terrible crime to this beautiful young lady. They do a routine search of the area. They interview witnesses to see if they saw or heard anything. They check gun shops in the area to see if anyone had recently bought a .32 caliber gun. They learn a man in the area recently did purchase a .32 from a store called Diamond Hardware. His name is Lester Eubanks. He bought the gun on October 23rd, just 3 weeks ago. As a side note, this .32 caliber gun was located near the crime scene the next day, and the serial number confirmed it was registered to him. Who is Lester Eubanks? He is 22 years old. He is the son of a well-respected preacher, and he lives close to this crime scene and the laundromats. He's kind of an oddball, according to people who saw him around. Apparently, he used to walk down the streets carrying nunchucks and just playing and swinging them around. He has a black belt in karate and carries the black belt around with him. He has a criminal history. He had a history of sexual assault and attempted rapes. On 2 separate occasions, he grabbed a 12-year-old girl and a 16-year-old girl and attempted to rape them, but they managed to get away. He's currently out on a $5,000 bond after a grand jury indicted him for assault with attempt to rape. Yeah, this guy's a real piece of shit. They get in touch with Lester and meet him at his home. They tell him, "We need to ask you some questions about this new gun you bought." This is great because if he is her killer, this is just 1 day after Mary Ellen's body was found. This guy will be off the streets now. Trigger warning for this next part since she is 14 years old. Lester admits to police that he saw Mary Ellen walking down the street. He knocked her down and pulled her behind a vacant house. He attempted to rape her, but she wouldn't stop screaming. He kept telling her to shut up, but she kept screaming. So he shot her 2 times, once in the chest and once in the abdomen. He left her there to die and walked home where he took a shower and got dressed up to go dancing. Trigger warning again. He left his house, and as he walked by the area where he left Mary Ellen, he heard her moaning and making noises. She was still alive and struggling to breathe. So he picked up a brick that was on the ground and beat her in the head with it, and the noises stopped. Then he went dancing. Lester Eubanks is charged with first-degree murder. The Mansfield, Ohio police were praised significantly for catching this killer so quickly. Everyone is saddened and shocked at the loss of Mary Ellen, but thankful her killer is away where he can't hurt anyone again. In 1966, this is a few months after Mary Ellen's murder, Lester tried to plead insanity but was found to be completely fine. Towards the end of the trial, the prosecutor grabs a brick and slams it down on the table in front of Lester to show the court how brutal of a murder this was. Lester is found guilty by a jury and sentenced to death row. It would be years until his execution since there is a lengthy appeal process. Mary Ellen's family is satisfied with the result. Her sister said the case was closed and wrapped up with a gift bow. It was a clean, open-shut case. He murdered Mary Ellen, he admits to it and pled guilty. He gets sentenced to the electric chair. This was back when they had the electric chair. This is supposed to be the end. We should never hear the name Lester Eubanks again. But in 1972, Lester had been in prison for 7 years. He was 3 days away from his execution. He's beginning to count down the hours and plan his last meal. Then he is informed the execution has been canceled. The United States Supreme Court suddenly declared that the death penalty was unconstitutional. According to deathpenaltyinfo.org, every current death sentence in the U.S. was overturned. It spared the lives of nearly 600 people in the country who were awaiting the death penalty. One of those included Lester. Lester Eubanks had his death sentence commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As a side note, the death penalty is currently a legal penalty in Ohio today in 2024, but all executions have been suspended indefinitely due to the state's inability to secure the drugs needed for lethal injections. The electric chair is no longer an option. Mary Ellen's mother, Cassie, was notified that Lester's sentence was commuted to life in prison, and he was no longer going to receive the death penalty. She wasn't happy, but she knew there was nothing she could do. This was a national thing, not just a Ohio thing or something just unique to Lester. 600 other prisoners in the United States had their sentences commuted, so their family wasn't going to be the only one going through this. She wasn't happy, but took comfort in knowing that he would be locked up for the rest of his life. Lester is moved out of death row, where he was spending 23 hours a day alone in a cell. He's placed in general population with everyone else. He wasn't just amongst murderers anymore. Now he's housed next to guys who owed child support and non-violent offenders. He was charming and became friends with the guards. He was given jobs to do around the prison. One inmate who was with him on death row told Unsolved Mysteries he never liked him. He said he was a jerk, but for some reason the guards really liked him, so much so that they appointed him as a trustee. Lester became a really good artist in prison. He competed in art shows, and most of the time he won first place. He had lots of art supplies and spent his days painting. Sometimes these art shows took place outside of prison, and Lester was allowed to attend in his regular civilian clothes. The other artists at the show had no idea what he had done. Lester was even featured in an article about model prisoners. Ohio comes up with this program for good behavior in prison. It allows inmates that display good behavior to be allowed some freedom. Sometimes they're given permission to take the truck to the landfill or venture outside of the prison unattended. Some were allowed to attend church with their families. Lester Eubanks gets to be a part of this program. Don't get me wrong, in my opinion, prison reform can be a great thing for mild, non-violent offenders, like someone who's in there for 10 years for tax fraud, not for inmates who rape and kill children. As a side note, Kim Kardashian, lover or hater, she has spent a lot of time trying to work on prison reform. She met with Donald Trump a few years ago and discussed getting a 63-year-old woman named Alice Johnson's sentence commuted. Alice was serving a life sentence for nonviolent drug charges. After the meeting, President Trump pardoned her sentence, and she was free. Whether his decision was influenced by Kim Kardashian or not, I have no idea. Part of prison reform is to give inmates more freedom. Again, these activities should be reserved for mild, nonviolent offenders. Someone who kills a child shouldn't be eligible for these kind of things. Someone who does that doesn't deserve to see the light of day. But Lester is given a lot of freedom in prison. On December 7th, 1973, as part of the Good Behavior Program, Lester is allowed to venture out to a shopping area where he could do Christmas shopping for his family. Are you kidding me? He was allowed to wear plain civilian clothes. He was placed in the prison van and dropped off at a busy shopping mall in Columbus, Ohio. The rules were that he could be 100% unattended. He didn't have to stay with an officer or in a group. He could be alone. He just had to report back to the van at 2:00 p.m. This gives him 4 hours of freedom. They arrive, and he steps out of the van wearing regular street clothes. There's no shackles and handcuffs like prisoners who are transported are wearing today. Lester gets to spend the next 4 hours Christmas shopping in a busy mall. God, this is infuriating. So, is it any surprise that this inmate with a life sentence doesn't return to the pickup area at 2:00 p.m.? They look around for him, and he's nowhere to be found. They wait around a half hour, and then it's time to panic. A warrant was issued, and Lester's picture was all over the news and newspapers. Word is spreading that the Ohio State Prison is allowing inmates out of the prison, and people are outraged, as they should be. Some believed the prison had good intentions with this program, but they were crazy to give an inmate at this level this much freedom. One of the officers had to be the one to call Mary Ellen's mother. Imagine having to be the person to make this call. They tell Cassie that Lester escaped. She is extremely upset, as any mother would be. But when they tell her, well, we let him out so he could Christmas shop and he didn't return, she loses it. She yells, "What do you mean you let him out for a few hours to Christmas shop?" Myrtle is Mary Ellen's sister, and she was 18 at the time of her sister's death. She said her mother was beside herself after she got this phone call. Her mother suffered for many years with guilt for sending her to the laundromat in the first place. She was never the same again. Now she's got this whole other issue to deal with. They begin having flashbacks of the night that Mary Ellen died, and it was like going through it all over again. Mary Ellen could have been anyone's daughter, anyone's sister. She could have been your child's best friend. Imagine for a moment that Mary Ellen is your 14-year-old daughter. Her killer gets a death sentence, then it's commuted to life in prison. Then he gets all these extra freedoms, and now he's out on the streets. I cannot believe this family has to go through this. They trusted the system to make sure he could never hurt anyone again, and here we are. Imagine if Cassie and her daughters were out Christmas shopping at the Columbus Mall and saw this man who was supposed to be in prison in one of the stores. The whole thing is really upsetting. The Good Behavior Program was removed after Lester's escape, but Lester wasn't the only one. 3 other inmates escaped in a period of 10 days due to this program. They reach out to family and friends of Lester, and they all say they haven't seen him. If they are aiding a fugitive, they're not going to say. A U.S. Deputy Marshal was interviewed by Unsolved Mysteries, and he said, look at Lester's visitation log in prison. So Lester has visitors about once a month for a long time, sometimes once every other month. But before his escape, he was getting the same visitors way more frequently. They began visiting once a week, and this went on for a while, and then he escapes. The deputy marshal said, "Are you telling me these visits just stopped suddenly?" The marshals believed that someone who was a close associate picked him up and took him to Michigan, where he lived for 2 weeks before heading to California. It is currently December 2024, and Lester Eubanks has never been caught. He has been free since December 7th, 1973, 51 years ago. That is insane. Just some timelines here. He went to prison when he was around 22. He spent 7 years on death row, 1 year in general population, and then he is free. He's been out 51 years, making him around 81 years old today in 2024. The FBI believes that he is alive today. Their theory is that he's behaved himself all these years and hasn't killed anyone else, and somehow managed to evade authorities for the last 51 years. He likely has a family who has no idea who he really is. Lester could be the old man sitting at the diner. He could be the person in front of you at the grocery store. He could be the friendly old guy who walks his dog by your house every morning and waves to you, when in reality, he's a rapist and a child murderer. Dr. Michael Bork, who is the chief psychologist with the U.S. Marshals Service, told ABC 6 News that Lester has likely surrounded himself with people who think he's harmless, or people who may know about his past but feel he's been rehabilitated. He says he's likely hiding in plain sight near people so he can easily manipulate them like he did to the guards. Because it's believed that he faked it the whole time in prison. He pretended to be this wonderful person who wouldn't harm a soul so he could get extra privileges so he could escape. Police believe that immediately after his escape in Ohio, he went to Michigan and then to California, where he lived in Los Angeles under the new name Victor Young. They believe he commuted around by bicycle and used his fishing license with his new name, Victor Young, to modify into a Social Security card. Victor Young worked at a waterbed manufacturer in Los Angeles for a few years. So in 2021, ABC News reported that U.S. Marshals had unearthed a bunch of photos taken in the 70s and 80s at the waterbed factory. These were all company picnic photos and Christmas parties and stuff like that. They were trying to get in touch with some of the employees in these photos so they could get info on Victor Young. One employee said every time the camera came out, Victor would disappear to the bathroom. He made it clear he did not want his photo taken. His supervisor, a woman by the name of Joy, said he always rode his 10-speed bicycle to work. Some days, if it was raining, she'd offer him a ride home, and he would accept, but he wouldn't let her drive him all the way to his house. He didn't want her to know where he lived. She also remembered he wore a lot of cologne, so much that it would give her a headache. U.S. Marshals believed that he lived and worked in L.A. for many years under the name Victor Young. He may have been living with his cousin's widow, a woman by the name of Kay. So America's Most Wanted aired an episode about Lester Eubanks in 1994. Kay called in a tip and said that he had lived with her for years. Kay allegedly became tired of him and annoyed by him, so she made up a story about getting stopped and questioned about him. She tells Lester, they may be onto you living here with me because I was stopped and asked if I had ever seen you. This freaks Lester out and he packs up and leaves. It's believed he traveled to the woods of Alabama where he hid for a long time. He worked as a janitor at a center for troubled youth. It's terrifying to know that he was working near children. The investigators received credible tips that he was in Ohio, California, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, but every time investigators figured out where he was, he would be gone. U.S. Marshal David Seiler told Rolling Stone magazine in 2019, "All we need is that one tipster, the one person that can bring in the last piece of the puzzle, even if they knew him a year ago, 2 years ago, someone to say, 'I know that guy.'" He also added that Lester has a passion for music, arts, and karate, which could be something he may still show interest in. Deputy Seiler believes Lester started this escape process 2 or 3 years earlier. He started making sure he was showing good behavior so he could charm the prison guards. According to Rolling Stone magazine, in the 90s, a new police captain of Mansfield, Ohio Police Department started looking into this case. This wasn't his jurisdiction. Even though Mary Ellen was killed in Mansfield, Ohio, he escaped from Columbus, Ohio, so it's their jurisdiction, not his. But he was curious and just entered Lester's name into the database. He was shocked to see there was no active warrant currently for Lester Eubanks. How this guy gets away with so much is beyond me. This is crazy because how long has this warrant not been active? This may explain why he's gotten away for so long. I don't know if his warrant expired and no one renewed it, but if Lester was pulled over by police, he would be let go since there was no active warrant for him. Law enforcement would have no idea that he's one of the world's most wanted men. This police captain was so baffled by this that he contacted America's Most Wanted and was like, "Mr. John Walsh, you need to run this story. This child rapist and killer has been on the run for 20 years now." John Walsh is like, "No problem." The episode did bring in a lot of tips, but he still was never caught. He always got away before they got there. LAPD detective Tim Connor said of Lester, "He's very cunning. He's not a dumb guy. He's been avoiding the authorities for 40 plus years. I don't think he ever took a job where he needed to be fingerprinted or photographed. I don't think he ever took employment that did any kind of background check. He was a guy who didn't lay his head in one place for very long." Mary Ellen's family members, who are still alive, pleaded with the public to please turn him in if you see him. It's such a shame that they even have to do that. Mary Ellen's mother, Cassie, died in 2000, leaving another void in their family. Her daughters say that she was never the same. She lived the rest of her life with a broken heart and overwhelmed by guilt, so much that it affected her health. Lester not only took the life of Mary Ellen, he destroyed her family and their community. No one felt safe anymore after that night. Mary Ellen's sister Brenda, who was only 12 at the time of her sister's murder, remember, she was the one at the laundromat with her. Her life was never the same, and she was greatly traumatized. She spent 4 years in the Air Force, and then she went on to be a correctional officer, one that keeps violent offenders in prison. Brenda passed away in 2014 at age 61. ABC released an 8-part podcast called Have You Seen This Man? It's a series on Lester Eubanks. I haven't listened to it, but it got good reviews and it goes into way more detail about his time on the run than I can give you in 30 minutes. If you want a deep dive into the case, definitely check it out. In 2020, Lester's case was featured on the Unsolved Mysteries reboot. The U.S. Marshals claim that after their show aired, they believe he was in the Los Angeles area because they received photos of him with friends. He was around 76 years old, but they can tell it's him. Lester Eubanks is still out there today. He is 81 years old. He's got to be getting tired and sloppy. At 81, it's hard to run around and evade the law, but he's somehow doing it. He's currently on the U.S. Marshals Most Wanted list, and the reward has recently been doubled, a $50,000 reward for his capture. There is a high-tech age progression photo of what he looks like on their website. If you ever worked with someone who you believe is Lester or ran into him occasionally, please come forward so this man can finish serving out his life sentence while he's still alive. Lester is 5'11" tall. He may be using the alias Victor Young. He is left-handed and has really good art skills, and he may even show you his paintings. Mary Ellen had justice. Lester was just 3 days from his execution date, and then it was taken away. And now we all have to work for her to get justice again. U.S. Marshal Peter Elliott said, quote, "The U.S. Marshals are not deterred by the passage of time when it comes to cases like this one. We are fueled by one thing, and that is justice for 14-year-old Mary Ellen Deener." Rest in peace to sweet Mary Ellen, a young girl who was quiet, loved roller skating, and her family. She would be 73 years old today. That's it for this week, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care, and much love to you all.